to show you how I create my templates when I use a pattern quite a bit. So I do have patterns that I have purchased acrylic templates for, that the acrylic templates are much thicker than these. Obviously these are much thinner, and they are basically just plastic chopping boards, and they're like an opaque, they're not completely clear, but they are quite see-through, and they do just make it easier so that if you're fussy cutting and you want to be able to see the fabric underneath, and they are just a little bit more robust and sturdy. Obviously they're not completely rotary cutter proof, so if you're using them to line up against a rotary cutter will cut through them. So if you're using, an acrylic template is very similar to a quilting ruler, so you can butt a quilting ruler up against the acrylic template, and obviously a rotary cutter won't cut through it, but a rotary cutter will cut through one of these templates. But it does make for much longer lasting pattern. You can fussy cut, and it makes pattern matching so much easier. And obviously I actually find drawing round these a lot easier than trying to draw around the paper patterns, because they don't move as much. So this is how I will trace one of my patterns, that especially if I find I use a pattern quite a bit, if it's one of my favourites, I will make my own templates out of these acrylic cutting sheets. So I do sell these on my website. You can get them off Amazon as well, but I do sell them singly on my website too. So I just have these pattern pieces that I've used in a previous video, and I'm just going to trace the one out for now, just showing you how I do it. So what I will do is I will try to make sure that I get the most out of my mat, because obviously you want to utilize them for cost as much as possible. So where there's a straight edge, I will try to line up, sorry, I'm just going to try and line this up a little bit better in the viewfinder. There we go. Sorry, I'm kind of doing this on a funny angle, so and it's a little bit back to front, so the way I move it, it goes opposite in the camera, so it's confusing me a little bit. It doesn't take much. So yeah, so where there's a straight edge, where I can, I will try and line it up against the straight edge of one of the mats, and then I'll usually place something heavy on top. So you try and place something that won't get in my way. I've got a little thing of pattern weights there, just so that it doesn't move while I'm working. And you can do this a number of ways. You can freehand around with your pen. I'm using a Sharpie, so you can freehand round. What I tend to do is try and line it up and draw down with so it's nice and straight. Now what I do is I line up the edge of my ruler, just tilt the camera a little bit so you can see, and I'll try and zoom in. Oh no, I'm zooming out. I'm totally back to front today, sorry. Had a couple of days of not very good sleep, so I'm a bit discombobulated. So I will line up the edge of the ruler against the edge of the pattern piece, so that when I draw the line, the edge of the line is against the edge of the pattern piece, so that when I cut my pattern piece, I am cutting the pattern piece exactly the same size. So I'm not So if I was to do it the opposite way, just move this slightly a second. If I was to do it the opposite way and I was to line the edge up against the edge and then draw my line, I would be extending the pattern by the thickness of my Sharpie, which would increase the pattern piece. So I tend to do it this way so that I am not making the pattern any bigger. I hope that makes sense. So if you do it the opposite way, so if you are putting the ruler against the pattern piece and against the edge of the pattern and drawing the line this way, what you would need to do is you would need to cut so that there was no line showing, so that you weren't extending the pattern piece at all. Where I'm going to be cutting and the line will be showing because my line is within the pattern piece. I hope that kind of makes sense to you. It does in my head, and I hope I've explained it properly. Because obviously if even just sort of like a few millimeters on a pattern piece, you know what it's like when you print out a pattern and it hasn't, you know, if the pattern hasn't sort of printed out correctly, and it can make such a difference to the outcome of the pattern. So I've traced round my pattern piece. I've got 2 marks here which are at 3/4 of an inch, which dictate to me my zipper placement. So I've marked them on my pattern piece as well, so I'm going to mark them on this piece. And I'm just going to turn it round and move the pattern piece from underneath. And what I will do is I will write on which piece it is. So it's my exterior piece. I need to cut 2 in exterior fabric, and I need to cut 2 in interfacing, and I will also write on what my seam allowance is on my pattern pieces. That's just a habit that I've tend to get into, because obviously lots of different patterns have lots of different seam allowances, and rather than, and if it's a pattern I've sewn quite a bit, sometimes I won't need to refer back to the instructions to actually sew the pattern, but I might not 100% remember what the seam allowance is. So if it's on the pattern piece, I don't need to like go into my computer and open up the file to get, because I quite often don't print out the instructions. I leave them on my computer and I just open them up on my tablet. So that is how I will create my pattern pieces, and then I will literally just follow the same principle for the rest of the pattern pieces, and I would trace out all of the pattern pieces that I need. I will quite often use any little bits to cut out zipper tabs, anything that if I have quite like a long bit, you could create a piece for rivet placement templates if you wanted to. You could use this to create your own zipper accent piece if you had a specific, if you found that you were always using the same size zipper accent piece, you could create a template out of acrylic that you could just trace around. It's really, really versatile. So what I would do is I'll use non-fabric scissors to cut this out, and I will be cutting against this outside edge because that was where the edge of my pattern was, to make sure that it stays the same size. If you have a spare rotary cutter and you've maybe just changed out a blade for one of your old rotary cutter blades, you can use a rotary cutter blade to cut this, which is like what I'm saying, if you're using a rotary cutter to cut with this, a rotary cutter will cut through this, so you would have to be very, very, very careful, because obviously, as you'll know if you're using a rotary cutter with fabric, with a paper pattern piece, and you slice into it, obviously it reduces your pattern piece and it changes your pattern piece ever so slightly. So if you're creating yourself a set of templates from a pattern piece that you've used quite a bit, what I would suggest you do is print yourself out a new set of the pattern pieces, just so that you know they're 100% right. Especially, like I say, if you have used rotary cutters with your pattern pieces in the past, and you know you might have taken small amounts out of those pattern pieces, you want to make sure that they're exactly perfect. So that is my pattern piece for this little pouch that I'm probably going to be working on in the future. And just so that you can see, I've just got a little bit of fabric here, and what it does is it means that where you're placing your fabric, you can then see exactly. And what you can do as well, if you want to, is you can mark the center of this piece, so you can draw a line down the center, so that if you had a piece that a part of this fabric that you wanted to be in the center, you can line it up so that you know exactly where it's going to be, so that if you wanted to cut another piece and you wanted the center piece to be exactly the same, you can do that. So it does make it so much easier to replicate pattern pieces, to fussy cut pattern pieces. But that is how I create all of my own templates, especially if it's a pattern that you've either created yourself, or if you have if you've hacked a pattern. So if you've bought a pattern and you've made changes to it, you might have elongated the pattern, you might have added things to the pattern, you might have made changes that you know you really like about that pattern, and you've made it to the paper pattern, and you want to make your own templates. Obviously they won't be available. This is a great way that you can create your own templates from that. So hope this video has been helpful. Like always, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. I'll do my best to answer them. Please do like the video, it helps with the YouTube algorithm, and feel free to subscribe, and then you'll be notified of any future videos as they come out. So thank you for watching as always, and bye.